Hello everyone, we're going to talk about interval notation today. So we're going to use some previous knowledge about inequalities that you learned in Algebra 1 and Algebra Middle School and Pre-Algebra. And so if you want to take a second to pause the video and you can copy this table down while we talk about it. So we want to relate back to inequality notation. So we have this, we could say x is less than 2 or x is greater than 2 is going to be separate than greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. So if we have one of these in a single number line, so like x is less than 2, we would have an open circle or a circle that's not filled in. I call this all of these open, and we would shade to the left. So we have this open circle. We have, if we had something like y is less than x, then that would be a dashed line, and we would shade everything underneath it. And then if we have interval notation, which we're going to find out about today, you're going to have a parentheses instead of a bracket like we have down here. So the same goes true for greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. If we graph it on a single number line, then it's going to be filled in circle, or what I call closed. And then our number line, if it was like y is greater than or equal to x plus 2, we would have something where it's a closed circle, and then we would shade one side or the other. And then these are going to have brackets versus these. One thing, the way that I keep these separate in my head is that all of these in my brain take less ink to draw than these. And so that's how I relate those all together. So if that works for you, that's awesome. If not, then we really need to memorize this table. So interval notation is a simpler way to write inequalities. And so what we want to do is we need to know a lower bound and an upper bound. And so these are always, what this means is our lower bound goes on the left. So the smaller number, or the number furthest left on the number line, goes on the left, and the largest number goes on the right. So we really need to remember lower bound, upper bound, and understand what those mean. Now this works if this was a bracket and those are brackets over there. So it's not determined based on that. The brackets or parentheses determine whether we include that endpoint. And with that, we can have multiple of different ones. We can have a parentheses and a bracket. It does not matter. It just depends on the actual problem. With all real numbers, there's a number that comes up, or a concept that comes up quite a bit with these. And so we've always used where you can write out all real numbers or that symbol. And so again, in kind of handwritten form, it looks something like that. And those are always acceptable, but if we have something that needs to be an interval notation, which all your answers are going to have to be, we cannot write that anymore. So in a graphical aspect, all real numbers means all the numbers on the number line. And so we would go from negative infinity all the way to positive infinity. Well, we need to be able to write that in interval notation. So if we're thinking back on the last slide where it says lower bound, well, that means we're going to be, lower bound is going to be negative infinity because we're going to keep going all the way to negative infinity. And our upper bound is going to be positive infinity. Now, the key thing with this is that you need to recognize, can we reach negative infinity or positive infinity? And that answer is no, we can't reach negative infinity. And so we're going to have that be an open parentheses on both sides. Anytime you have an infinity or a negative infinity, it must be a parentheses or open because we cannot actually reach that value because numbers will continue to go on forever in either direction. So how we can convert this between an inequality format and an interval notation and a number line. So if we have something back from Algebra 1, this is a compound and inequality. So we have negative 2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 6. So we go to the number line first just because I think it's easier to see the visual. And so we go to negative 2, we put a circle, and we go to positive 6, and we put a circle. Now at negative 2, we have this less than or equal to sign, so that's going to be a filled in circle. And the same thing at 6, we have a closed circle as well. Now you need to remember back from Algebra 1 that this is a compound and so we only shade the middle. So all those values on the left, do not shade anywhere else. Okay, so that would be our number line notation. And then interval notation means that we have our lower bound, which is easy to pick off of a graph, and our upper bound, which is easy to pick off a graph. So we would say our lower bound in this case is negative 2, and our upper bound is 6. Now you need to take each piece by itself. So at negative 2, we have this closed circle. So that's going to be a closed bracket on our interval notation. Or you can refer back to the inequality of having the less than or equal to sign. Same thing with this 6, we have a closed circle. So we're going to have a closed bracket on the right side. And so ultimately our goal is to get to interval notation, but all three of these things represent the same concept, the same idea. Okay? So looking at, if we start with interval notation, so we start with negative 8 comma infinity. We want to write this as I would use the number line first, just because I think it's the easiest. It's not required to go first, but I think it's the easiest to see visually. So we go to -8 is our lower bound, or how far to the left we go, and then how far to the right we go is to positive infinity, which is all the way over here. And so we want to write all of this, and shade all to the right of that. Now at -8 we have this parenthesis, so that means it's going to be an open circle, or it's going to be exclusive of -8. So that would be our number line from there. Our inequality notation, if we have a single shaded area, then we can write a single inequality. So we can say x and -8 because that's our endpoint. And then all of these numbers are greater than -8, so we're going to say x is greater than -8. And then it's an open circle, so it's going to be just x is greater than -8. And then again, all three of these are the same representation of the same set of numbers. Okay, our last one is going to be off of a number line. And so you have to refer back again to Algebra 1 and knowing what a compound OR inequality is. And so we have this left side and we have this right side. And so we want to make sure that we have those down as this is an OR. So we're going to say x is less than something or x is greater than something. And so we can write those separately. So for this left side, we can say that x and -4. And again, I'm doing the inequality notation just because you have seen this before. And we're going to go to the left of that, or all the numbers less than that. So we're going to say x is less than -4. And then we're going to say or, you have to have or there. And then we're going to look at this right side. And so over here, and so that circle or endpoint, we're going to say x, and it is at 11. And so, because it's between 10 and 12. And then we're going to say that it is going to be greater than, and it's a closed circle, so we're going to say greater than or equal to. And that would be our inequality notation for this number line. So if you have two separate shaded areas like we do here, you're going to have two separate inequalities. You're going to say x is less than something or x is greater than something. The same holds true for interval notation, in that you're going to have two separate intervals because we have two separate shaded areas. So for this left side, similar to what we did with inequality notation, we want to say what's our lower bound. So we go all the way to the left, and so that's all the way to -infinity. And then we go all the way to -4. Again, with infinity, we have a parenthesis. At -4, we have an open circle, so we have an open parenthesis. And then making sure we're on the same line, and I'll show why in a second, we have 11 as our lower bound, and then we are going to positive infinity on that. Again, infinity is always parentheses, but we have a closed circle, so we're going to have a closed bracket. Now, instead of writing or, we want to use mathematical notation that is in interval notation, and so we're going to use union, which means or. So we could be in -infinity to -4 or 11 to infinity with a bracket on 11. And that represents union. It's like a capital U in between the two. So I hope this helps with you learning interval notation.